Let me know if you can't see or hear that.
There we go.
Someone's at the door.
Yep.
Oh, and I can't, Anne, sorry, do you have,
you.
I don't have the little ellipsis to put it on live stream, do you?
More?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the option to live stream.
On the bottom by whiteboards.
More?
Yeah,
I'm
there
in the
should be
more. It's a whiteboard. Okay, hold on.
beside the whiteboard on the bottom, there's like 3 dots. Hi, Sheila.
Well, let me close the participant panel. Maybe it's blocking it. I still don't see.
When I hit those 3 dots, I see hide reactions, webinar settings, and background effects.
Exactly.
Okay, well, it's recording. We can put it up later.
Yeah, we'll post it later.
We just have to cross our toes.
Right.
Are people in? I can't tell.
Sheila's in. There's 24.
I'm in, but I can't use my videos for some reason.
There's 30 participants
we don't
in
allow
right
you.
now.
Yeah, there's.
I can see 30 participants.
Okay, so
I guess
all I see is Sheila. I just want to make sure, is there a way that I want to make sure people can see the PowerPoint screen right now? I wonder if there's a chat.
There's a chat, yeah. You can switch it.
I'll ask them.
I think they can see it.
I think so.
Amara's there, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it.
Carol Preble raised her hand.
Yay.
That means she must, I bet you that means she can see it.
They're giving us the thumbs up. All right.
All right, on we go.
Okay.
Had a little bit of technical difficulties. It's the way my
we're
week's
only,
been going.
You know what? Hold on a second. I'm going to allow Chris Curtis to talk a moment because they waved their hand. Maybe they can't hear us. Hold on.
Okay.
Chris, I just enabled you to talk. Go ahead. Oh, we can't hear you. All right, I'm moving on to Joanne Lee. Okay. Hold on. Joanne Lee, I've enabled you to talk. Can you see the screen?
I can.
All righty,
Great.
on we go. Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Welcome everyone to our webinar from our Health and Genetics Chair, Kevin Snyder, who's graciously said he would help to educate us on the SPS1 and SHPN1 requirement guidelines, I should say, that we've added to our ethical breeding practices. And so without further ado, Kevin Snyder. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mary. I have an earphone in, so hopefully you don't hear any kids in the background, but I make no promises. Okay, so I'm going to hopefully give you guys a nice brief overview and help you better understand each of these diseases and where things are at now, and kind of how we came to the recommendation. So this should be about anywhere from 35 to 40 minutes, and then I'm happy to take questions as well. So we're going to go through each disease. So SPS stands for shaking puppy syndrome and Siberian Husky polyneuropathy. And then we'll talk about kind of how those diseases occur and the testing recommendations that we submitted to the board and are now included in the ethical breeding guidelines, and questions from the audience. So the makeup of the committee is myself, Dr. Blanker, Dr. Sarah and Dr. Lauren Baker. She is a Siberian Husky enthusiast, not a breeder, and she was a colleague back when I did training at Wisconsin, and is extremely qualified to help us with genetics questions as well as health questions with her doctor of veterinary medicine. A little bit about myself. Just, I know a lot of you personally, but professionally, I'm a diplomat of the ACVO. So I am a boarded ophthalmologist. I received my DVM from University of Wisconsin. And at that time, after my doctor of veterinary medicine, I also did a master's in comparative biomedical science. And well before that, I have a BA in Chinese language. And I did some training as well at Colorado State. So when you choose to specialize, you have to do years and years of extra training, and some of that was done at Colorado State in addition to Wisconsin. Other things that I do right now, I'm the president of the Alaska Veterinary Medical Association, and I'm also serving a 4-year term on the ACVO Genetics Committee. So the ACVO has something called the Blue Book, that when you guys take your dogs to get screened by an ophthalmologist in any breed, there are recommendations depending on what they find, whether that is, we recommend to not breed, we recommend that you can breed, or a breeder option. So I'm on the committee that looks at the statistics and publications for the year and tries to make the best recommendations we can with the information that we have. And then right now I am the only ophthalmologist in Alaska, and I own my own small business working out of other clinics around the state, trying to offer specialty services. Okay, so why are we here? I think that you guys all signed up for this on a Friday evening because we're all striving to try and breed healthy quality dogs. And ultimately, that is the end goal for all of us. We want a sound dog, and we want them to be as healthy as possible with a long life. And I do think that this presentation, it's only possible that we're talking about this due to the years of positive collaboration that led us to some of these answers between breeders, researchers at multiple universities, and owners being forthcoming with their health concerns and working with researchers to obtain samples for what they needed. So the diseases themselves are not nice to talk about, but if you take a different optimistic tone, this was a lot of collaboration and funding from the SHCA that goes into us being able to talk about these two diseases. Okay, so I'm going to give you the briefest of overviews about the nervous system. I am not going to go into any detail about the labels on this, but essentially the nervous system has two parts. There's your brain and your spinal cord, and then there's all of these yellow nerves branching off of those, and those are going to every part of your body you could think of. So internal organs, muscles, everything has nerve innervation. So there's the central nervous system, and there's the peripheral nervous system, so all the yellow. This is essentially like a these are superhighways, so there is communication back and forth all the time. There's feedback coming back from the muscles, and there's instructions coming down from the brain. And so the communication between those two parts has to be working well for us to be normal and for our dogs to be normal. That is a gross simplification, but that highway component, I think, is the best way to think about it. So there's signals going back and forth, and they need to be traveling at light speed, essentially, to be able to have a normal dog. And this does not need to, I'm not going to make this complex, but down at the bottom here is what I want you to see. So in those communication highways, So those are nerves. There's a yellow middle part, and that's called an axon. And then there's this purple stuff around it. That's called myelin. And the myelin helps the communication signals kind of travel down the highway. So you need a normal axon, so a normal nerve, and you need normal myelin for the signals to travel down the highway. Okay, so the first disease we're going to talk about is shaken puppy syndrome type 1. The reason it's called type 1 is because this is the first type that we've been able to successfully identify in the Siberian, so they abbreviated it SPS1. The first identifiable signs you would see if a puppy had this is very young, right when they're starting to move around the box, 2 to 3 weeks of age. They start to show tremors when they're starting to move. They have difficulty getting up onto their feet, and they are very uncoordinated. And so the best way, honestly, instead of describing this, is to show you videos. These are not fun videos to watch, but they illustrate the disease very well. So the first video, this is a 2-week-old puppy, so just starting to move around. And if you watch its hind limbs in particular, it has tremors while it's trying to move. It's not really able to get up on itself, and it's really full body tremors, but most obvious to see in the back end. The next video I have is of a 4-week-old puppy. So this dog her pup is up on its feet, but this is hard to watch, but very difficult for it to move around. Full body tremors, just really unable to move anywhere with purpose. And this dog has shaken puppy syndrome. Interestingly, in these pups is that sometimes if they're not euthanized, clinical signs may improve. That is kind of it turns out that that's kind of a false promise, because the SPS dogs, all of them that we have tested as affected, have experienced sudden death less than 2 years of age. So despite those severe signs as a puppy, sometimes those signs improve, but those dogs do experience sudden death for an unexplained reason. So when researchers at the University of Minnesota started looking at these pups, and I won't go into the story of how they found what's going on, it's a little bit too long, but they were able to identify something called a mutation. So that is part of your DNA that is essentially changed or switched. And so it's coding for something that is different than normal. And these puppies were homozygous. So that means they have 2 bad copies of this mutation. And the mutation is called GJA1. And you guys don't need to remember that, but they have identified a specific mutation. And kind of fascinating to me is this same mutation does occur in people, in babies, and in a percentage of babies that have SIDS, which is a terrible disease called sudden infant death syndrome. A subset of those babies with SIDS actually have this mutation and die suddenly from a lethal cardiac rhythm. And they've been shown to have decreased myelination. So that myelin that we talked about at the very beginning, where you need that purple stuff coating the nerves to help communication, these puppies and some of these babies don't form that myelin even correctly. So it never even starts to form correctly. And that has been shown to be linked to SIDS in people. I thought that was interesting with the history of sudden death in a lot of these dogs as well. So how is this actually inherited? And thankfully, this is about as simple as it gets. So the disease is called fully penetrant autosomal recessive. I see Joanne is raising her hand. I'm not sure if that means she has a question, but I just saw it pop up onto the screen.
Don't see any questions in the
Okay.
Q&A.
Perfect.
I think she just left her hand up from before.
No worries. I just was making sure. So the inheritance pattern is called fully penetrant autosomal recessive. What does that mean? So that means that autosomal recessive means that dog must have 2 bad copies, one from each parent of the gene to be affected. So if a dog has 1 bad copy and 1 good copy, so 1 bad copy from one of the parents and the other parent passes on a bad copy or a good copy, they would not be affected. So you need 2 bad copies. And fully penetrant just means that if a dog comes up as 2 bad copies or homozygous, they will have this disease. There's no in between. There's no varying degrees of how the disease shows up. It's just, if it's very clear, it's 2 bad copies, you will have disease. If you have 1 bad copy, so that's called a carrier. So if you have a good copy and a bad copy, the dog is a carrier, but that dog does not show disease. And that's likely how this disease popped up. I'm not going to go too much into this slide. We'll kind of come back to this later on. So I'll talk more about testing later after we've gone through both diseases, but I just wanted to highlight the way that this is the only lab. So this lab is the ones that this lab found the mutation. So they're the ones that do the testing. And there's 3 statuses. So a clear dog, so not affected at all. This lab abbreviates that as NN, so normal. If you have 1 bad copy, so if that's like we just talked about, you're a carrier, then you have the results will say a D and an N, and it will explicitly say a carrier. And as I just said, a carrier dog is not at risk of developing disease. And then if the dog's affected, you probably will have a pretty good idea before you test, but that will come up as 2 bad copies, so DD. The statistics that they have so far, so this is just updated as of this week. Of the samples that they've submitted, we've submitted for testing, about 13 to 14, kind of depends on the past numbers too, but in that range, 13% are carriers. And it's not really the affected number that we worry about right now. It's really the carriers. So the dogs that are normal to us, but they have that 1 bad copy, and there's the potential that they could pass that. If they were bred to another carrier, then a puppy could get 2 bad copies. So the carrier percentage is about 13%, and about 86% of the dogs were clear. You can see we have a decent number of dogs that have been tested. I think that adds up to about 960. So almost 1,000 at this point, and that carrier percentage has either stayed the same, as I checked with them since the beginning of the summer. They've kind of slowly gone up. More people test. It may go down a little bit. And the other disease we're talking about, it actually went up a little bit. So this will be interesting for us to watch as we get more samples put in. And the carrier, the mutation, has been found in dogs from various countries, so not just the United States, but overseas as well. It just shows that it's widespread. Okay, so we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about a totally separate disease. This is the SHPN1, so they call it polyneuropathy, which means that poly is just multiple nerves are affected. And as best we know, there's no infection or inflammation that's underlying it. So we call it a neuropathy. So it's polyneuropathy, and it's the first one that we've been able to identify. So we call it type 1. So what does this look like? This one is much different than shaken puppy syndrome. So these signs do show up early if you catch them, or they can be really mild. And so 2 to 3 months is the earliest that they have been noted, but it can be a little bit older until you would realize that your dog would have this disease. It's also very similar clinical signs. The tremors is not there, but incoordination, muscle weakness is a huge one. They have a very just really unusual gait in the hind limbs as a high stepping gait. Sometimes it's called a bunny hopping gait, but it is because, as we'll talk about, it's because the nerve signals are not communicating with the muscles appropriately. And this is not something, so that like shaken puppy syndrome, those signs improved when they showed up early until they inexplicably passed away. But in this one, these signs get worse. So once you notice them, they get increasingly worse, and it leads to immobility. The dog has a hard time, depending on the severity of the disease, standing up and supporting its hind legs, and you start to kind of question quality of life once they reach that point. The muscles atrophy, and so they're really just not able to get around. I have multiple videos. These are dogs. This disease has different degrees of severity. So there's kind of like a mild, moderate, severe. So this dog, I would consider mild. It's the dog right in the center here. These are videos graciously shared to us by a breeder, and she's very forthcoming, and I'm glad that she's able to show us different degrees here. So this dog, if you watch it walk around, it's able to get around. At the beginning, especially, I'm going to rewind it. If you watch its hind legs, it just has a really unusual high stepping gait. He's not trying to pee on something. He's just doing that all the time. But this would be a mildly affected dog. And so still able to walk around, definitely not able to pull a sled, but is at least able to have a decent quality of life. Those signs do get worse, but a mildly affected dog may be able to do better than others. Okay, so the next dog, this is an older dog. This is probably late middle age. This dog has a lot of muscle weakness, but is still able to walk. So as it comes around here, you'll see that this would be considered probably moderate. That characteristic high stepping gait, a lot of that is kind of the inability to sense where its limbs are, and also muscle weakness. And then severe disease looks, it's difficult to watch, but severe disease looks like this. So the dog's really trying to get around, but muscle weakness is very pronounced, and pretty much decreased quality of life, even though mentally they're trying their best. The research group, when they were approached, there are similar diseases in other breeds, and there are other northern breeds even. So the Alaskan Malamutes have a polyneuropathy with very similar signs. They have found a mutation in Alaskan Malamutes, and they tested Siberians for that mutation, and the Siberians were negative. There's 2 other diseases in Alaskan Huskies that they've identified mutations. So Alaskan Huskies also get a polyneuropathy, young onset gait, walking abnormalities that progress very similar to what I just described. And the Siberians tested negative for that mutation, and yet another mutation in Alaskan Huskies. Slightly different disease, but still a neurologic disease. And so all 3 of these mutations that have been found by research groups, these Siberians were negative for. a pathologist or a neurologist at UC Davis, so University of California, Davis, was able to look at some sections of nerve from a dog that had passed away. And they found that if you go go all the way back to the beginning when I showed you that cartoon diagram of a nerve, they found that there were wide sections of the nerve that the myelin was not present. So the coating, that purple coating was not present. So that really affects how the signals travel down the nerve back and forth. And so they were able to identify that, and they confirmed that it was a polyneuropathy. And the group at University of Minnesota did the testing on the mutations that we knew, but they were able to do more research and finally found a mutation that these dogs have. And so I don't mean to get too medical terminology here, but the mutation is listed here in bold for anybody that's interested. It's called EXOSC1. And this mutation is it's inherited simply, but the way that it affects the dogs is interesting. Not to get into too many details, but essentially a gene codes for a protein in the body, and the protein does a job. And this mutation affects how those proteins are kind of read out from our genetic material. And so some proteins are just slightly more functional. Some proteins are very severely affected with this mutation, but all dogs with the mutation have disease, but the protein might work just slightly better in some dogs than others. And just like the shaken puppy syndrome, this is very common in dogs, and why most of the research gets done is with human funding, but this has also been identified in people, and people with this mutation have brain and nerve abnormalities very similar to what these dogs have. They have muscle biopsies from these people that show muscular atrophy, just like the Siberian show as well. Okay, so this is luckily still inherited pretty simply, which is really good. So autosomal recessive is the inheritance pattern for this disease. And this means that a dog must have 2 bad copies of the gene to be affected. So thankfully, this is a recessive disease. So you need 2 bad copies. The partially penetrant is the difference from the shaken puppy syndrome. So partially penetrant just means that you have to have 2 bad copies, but there's that kind of scale of how severe it is. And so some dogs will express the disease differently. But at the end of the day, you have to have 2 bad copies to have the disease, and whether it's mild, moderate, or severe, you're still affected. So where are the statistics on this? This is as of this week as well, after talking with the lab. So the carrier rate from submissions in dogs is, if you round 0.2% up, is 16%. That is kind of surprisingly high in my opinion. Even though that seems low, it's still pretty high. And this might be biased slightly upwards by people that are submitting samples. So I would love to see this come down a little bit as our sample sizes increase. But again, this is in the mid 900s for dogs that have been tested. One of the things I liked that this research group did is they actually took samples from the chick DNA database. So if you've donated blood on your dog and banked DNA, that allows these research groups to kind of test that DNA for things that they find. And so this group did that. They took 46 random dogs, tested their DNA, and 4 out of the 46 were carriers. So it's about a 9% carrier rate. So we'll kind of be curious to see where the carrier percentage actually falls, but it will likely be in that high single digits to hopefully low teens, somewhere in there. Just to put that in perspective, and kind of put that in something that we test for and we're used to testing for is I'm an ophthalmologist. Dogs come to me to be screened for cataracts. I'm on the committee that looks at those statistics, and the cataract percentage in our breed is around 7%. So last year it was low 7% of dogs that tested positive for cataracts, and luckily it actually went down a couple percent, 0.3 or 4 percentage points. So now it's in the high sixes, but it's about around that 7% range as well. And that's something that we're very used to testing for. So it might seem low, but it's pretty in line with diseases that we are looking at already. So when we saw this data and we have testing that is really a yes or no test where we can tell, we look and we can see if the dog has 2 bad copies or 1 bad copy or none. There's really no wiggle room. And so we make these testing recommendations when, if you just saw these diseases are, one of them is lethal and the other is extremely debilitating. Dogs aren't able to perform the ultimate function of the breed, and even beyond that, just have a decent quality of life. It's tough as they age, and that quality of life goes down. And like I just said, so these are direct genetic mutation tests. So there's not a lot of wiggle room. You submit the DNA, and the lab will tell us the status of the dog. The results don't change over time. So if you test your dog once whether they're 2 weeks old, 5 years old, 10 years old, that didn't change. And so it's a once in a lifetime test. So we do this, we learn the status of our dog, and we don't have to do it again. Unlike cataracts, where cataracts can pop up a couple years on, despite previously normal tests before. So how do we test? If we want to test, how do we test our dogs? So the only place that we can currently do this is through the lab that found the mutation. So this is at the University of Minnesota, and it's called the Canine Genetics Lab. They thankfully have a very nice website with really nice step-by-step instructions for how you do this. So if you go to their website, you Google the Canine Genetics Lab of Minnesota. I won't pop out of the PowerPoint right now to show you it, but if you type in Canine Genetics Lab Minnesota and Siberian Husky, the first thing that will come up is this thing called Siberian Husky Health Panel. And they have the 2 neurologic diseases we talked about. There is another bladder stone disease that is listed there, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We really are only talking about the neurologic diseases. And so when you go on that website, if you scroll down, they have step 1 through 4 of how you submit your samples. And I'm not going to kind of hold your hand through all of it right now because the instructions are very, very good. I'm going to point out a couple key things, but if you need help submitting samples for your dog and you don't understand what they're asking, I'm happy to help, or any other committee member is happy to help. But they have done a great job of making it really, really nice and simple. When you, I guess I'll go back really quick. So the instructions for your sample type, I've tested our dogs at my kennel, and the easiest way I found to do that is with cheek swabs. So you don't need to go to your vet to draw blood. You can order sterile swabs on Amazon or go buy some from Walgreens or CVS, and they have very nice examples of what is useful. And you actually take 2 swabs per dog, and you swab their cheeks not close to a meal. It has to be an hour before or after a meal. But the one thing I really wanted to highlight, because I used to work in a genetics lab, and this would happen all the time. Someone's ringing the doorbell. Is when you swab, if you do a cheek swab, please don't put that in a Ziploc bag. And they say this in their instructions, but you're going to put that in an envelope. The Ziploc bag allows the bacteria in the mouth to grow and can mess up the sample you're sending in. So despite what you think, you're going to swab your dog and put it in an envelope with your dog's name. You pay online, so it's not like the OFA where you write down your credit card or submit a check. So this one, you pay them directly on their website. You select the Siberian Husky 2-test combo, and you'll submit payment and they'll give you a receipt. You print out the receipt and you're going to send that in with your DNA sample. They do have price breaks for more dogs. So if you aren't just testing one dog and you're testing multiple dogs, the price will go slightly down. So when you are actually sending samples in, what you're going to have is 3 things in the mail. You're going to have likely 2 cheek swabs in an envelope for each dog. You make sure that they're not just white blank envelopes. You label them with the names. And you're going to have a receipt printed out showing that you paid. And then you're going to have their submission form on the website. That's just the dog's information. You'll have the date of birth, AKC number, etc. They do have price breaks for litters of puppies. And I believe if you go above 3 or 4 dogs, their price goes down. I know that, in today's world, something else to pay for is not necessarily what we want, but ultimately, I do think that it being a once in a lifetime test and the price it's not $10, but it's not exorbitant. You usually are paying anywhere from $40 to $60 for an eye test, and that's multiple times throughout the dog's life. So this is, it's not too expensive, but I do understand that the testing costs money. The one thing that is really nice about this lab is that these are not for-profit people. They are putting that money back into research. And it might not be exactly, directly for Siberians, but they are using the profits to fund research that the lab is doing. So I wanted to put this up here. I'm obviously sharing, this is a dog that we own, but I just wanted to I don't want it to be a mystery what this looks like. So when you get a report back, it looks like this. And I'm going to call out a couple things here to make your life a little bit easier so you know what to look for. The first thing shows the disease name. It's going to show the status of that. So you're going to have this dog is clear, so 2 normal copies. That's the first thing that you'll see. The really important thing is that this lab doesn't have the staff to send all of these for us to the OFA. So once you get this report, on it are instructions of how to send this to the OFA, similar to when you go to the ophthalmologist, you get your eye form, and you're still on you, though, to actually send that into the OFA. The address that you send it to is right on the form. You're going to have to sign and date it. And then please don't forget, everybody wants their fees paid. The OFA will charges an administrative fee to process that. So do not forget to include a check or your credit card information on the bottom of this form. But you can make a copy of this, sign it, include your include the fees for however many dogs, and then mail it to the OFA, and they will link that to your dog's AKC number. And so it's relatively simple. Okay, so the one thing that I did, this is, and people might have questions about this because this will be new for us, especially it's going to be new for me as well. The OFA will only do 1 generation, so the first generation of a puppy that's from 2 parents that have already been tested clear. They will only certify that first generation from those parents as clear by parentage. And so, for instance, we have a litter of puppies in our we kept some puppies and they are clear by parentage. I actually haven't done this yet, but I'll let you know how it goes. I'm hoping that it's as simple as it sounds, but I'm going to go out of my PowerPoint to the OFA's website to show you this. So once you go to ofa.org, if you go to applications at the top, once you click on applications, all of the possible test forms that you could think of are here. The one that we're going to use is called DNA-based genetic test, and they describe what it's for. So it's relatively self-explanatory, but it says this is to register DNA test results that have been performed somewhere else, or in this case that we'll be using it for likely is doing clear by parentage applications. And so you select that, and you go down to this bottom, and you can write it in yourself. So download a blank form, or you can fill it out online. I'm going to download a blank form just to show you what that looks like. I will answer questions in a second. So this is what the OFA's DNA-based form looks like. Very standard information that you've entered in many times, but you're going to have the AKC number of the sire and the dam, and hopefully the sire and the dam already have test results with the OFA that show that they're clear, and you'll send this in and they will issue something that's called a clear by parentage. Oh, you can't see it?
I was gonna say, we're looking at a different screen, Kevin. We're still at that exam related forms.
Okay. Go back. Got it. Let me try to get out of the PowerPoint and actually just go a different way. I'm going to share my desktop, so you guys are going to see everything, which is fine with me. Can you guys see that now, Mary?
Well, I thought we did.
We
We're
can
back
see your
at-
desktop now, yes.
Yeah, we can see your desktop. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll kind of back up where, let's say you have tested a breeding pair and now you have puppies out of that breeding pair, and you don't want to necessarily, you don't have to. If both of the parents were clear, you don't have to test that puppy again. And so you can do a clear by parentage where you still have to submit information to the OFA. So you go to the OFA's website, you click on applications, you find DNA-based genetic disease. And so it explains what you're doing it for. And it also has the wording that you're looking for, where this clear by parentage. And you're going to go down and you can download the form. So you're going to fill it out by hand, or you can fill it out online and then print it out. So for this purpose, just to illustrate what it looks like, I'm going to download a blank form and show you. It looks like this. And so you're going to list at the top, it says specific genetic disease test requested. So you're going to say SPS SHPN1 clear by parentage application. You're going to list your dog's information, list your sire and dam, and they'll be able to issue that puppy a clear by parentage. So instead of retesting every single puppy, even though you know there's clear parents, the OFA will let us do a clear by parentage for the direct or first generation out of those parents. They still want their fees, the $15 per dog or $10 for more than 3. This is new for all of us. This is how I was explained the best way to do this. So I have a puppy that I'll be doing this on. I'll let you know how it goes. But I do think that this is done for other breeds. We are definitely not the first breed to do this. And so hopefully it goes pretty smooth. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so what's up? I am, yeah. Okay, so can you guys see the PowerPoint again, Mary?
Yeah, well, yes, I'll assume it's the part, it says cleared by
Yes.
parentage.
Yeah,
Yes.
perfect, yes. I just screenshotted this off the OFA's website. This explains their policy on clear by parentage. So this only the direct or first generation offspring will be cleared by parentage. That is the OFA's policy. There's no wiggle room with that. And so you or we will be testing our dogs for this every other generation. And that is a crossbreeds the standard policy because the OFA does not want any liability doing clear by parentage 2 or 3 generations down the line.
Kevin, we have a
Yes.
question relative to the clear by parentage.
Yes.
Okay, it says, I was under the understanding after talking to OFA for clear by parentage, you also have to have both parents' DNA on file with the AKC as well as the offspring. Then following with AKC reading, the interpretation that the offspring is indeed out of those 2 parents. At that point, they will list clear by parentage. Is that the case?
Clarify that with them. That's a good question because if you register the dogs with the AKC under that litter, I hope that that's enough, but I can answer that question for you. I don't know the answer right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But I'll definitely follow up. Who asked that? So I know, and obviously I can get back to everybody because that would be something we all need to know.
Liz Chisholm. But you're right. We would all probably want to know that.
Yeah, yeah. In theory, it's simple.
Oh, wait, Jessica just jumped in and said the 3rd bullet point answers that question. Can you read the 3rd bullet point, please?
Yeah, it says if all 3 have been DNA identity profiled through the same lab using the identical marker panel and parentage on the offspring verified. I'll verify. I'll see how it goes. We'll ask OFA and AKC. Okay, so one of the questions that I've gotten already and I've heard is, so can we breed carriers? And why would we breed carriers? And so I have a couple diagrams here. A red square would be an affected dog. So you do not want to breed an affected dog. That's just, I'm not even going to go into it. You don't do that. Should you be able to breed a carrier? So a carrier has 1 bad copy and 1 good copy. Can you breed those 2 together? And the answer is no, you cannot. And the reason for that is there is a chance that if you breed carriers together, some puppies could get both bad copies and then they'll be affected dogs. And so we just don't want to be breeding with the chance of making affected dogs. But can you breed a carrier to a clear? And that answer is you can. So the clear does not have any bad copies. The carrier has 1. There's 0 chance that you'll make an affected dog. And it is up to you if you want to do this, but we are not telling you not to breed carriers because if that dog has merits and desirable traits and you breed that to a clear dog, you can continue on with that pedigree and safely choose clear puppies after that. If you don't want to have the carrier status on a dog, you breed the carrier to a clear, you test the puppies to see what the status is, and you can go forward with clear puppies and you don't have to get rid of that dog from the gene pool. So by doing this testing, we can safely keep the maximum number of dogs with merits in the gene pool. And that's all I have for right now, so I can take some questions.
You can type your questions in the Q&A or raise your hand. We'll take you off mute. I guess if you think of any questions, you could probably email Kevin or a member of the board and we'll get it to Kevin. Well, I guess thank you very much for all this information, Kevin, and for all your research and time.
And Sheila in the chat has commented that for clear by parentage, both parents have to have AKC DNA parentage profiles on record. I'll verify that, but Dr. Blinker is likely more familiar with it than I am. And she's probably correct. So I'll double check, but that might answer that first question.
So we do have a question that's come in and it asks, it's Chris Curtis, and she says, are there dogs with both? Oh, I mean the shaking puppy and okay.
You mean both diseases?
I believe that's what she means.
I don't think we found that yet. And that would be unlikely. The shaken puppy syndrome dogs, that disease is quite severe and they would pass away before they even get to 2 years of age.
Right. You have another question, Carol Preble. Have there been any test breedings done with 2 affected dogs to see if there are affected puppies?
So that's a good question. I don't think ethically I have heard of anybody doing that. I have had, if you kind of go back, I didn't include this for the sake of time, but the original breeder that encountered this disease, the affected puppy popped out of 2 healthy parents, and then, kind of like a related dog. I don't have the pedigree mapped out, but when I looked at it, carrier dogs were reliably producing affected dogs.
The reason the question was asked because we've done that with, you probably know this, we've done that with eyes,
Cataracts.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
And they're all clear. I think that's why they're asking if we've done the test breedings with.
Yeah,
That's a good. Do it with SHPN1, right? Because the SPS1 mortality wouldn't really allow for it.
Yeah, and it's the test breedings are like for cataracts. Cataracts are genetically very complicated. The tests for cataracts that we have, we call it a phenotypic test. So we are looking at the dog, trying to classify what we're seeing. So saying there's a cataract, or it looks like there's inherited cataract or genetic cataract, whatever. And then we're trying to use that information and make a decision on breeding, but we really don't know the genetic status of those dogs. So we're just trying to do the best that we can with that information. I do feel like this is different, where we are directly testing the dog's genetic status. We are testing the mutation that we know causes this disease. And so it's slightly different it's very different than cataracts, where it's a pretty clear answer, and cataracts is more, not murkier, but there's a lot more that goes into it. The genetics behind cataracts is likely very complex.
And then, Lisa Payne says, so are you saying this isn't hereditary?
Saying what?
Yeah, I'm not
cataracts, or
Lisa, I'm not understanding the question. All right, Carol Preble has raised her hand. Mary, can you turn her voice on?
I'm not a host anymore. I can do nothing.
I lost the thing that where the hands, how to turn on their,
Yeah, let me try to see if I can help with that. I'm gonna turn on, hopefully I turned on Carol's microphone. Does that work, Carol?
Carol Preble.
I think you still have to take yourself off mute.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
You've answered the question. I had my hand up and then I found out how to type.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
That's good.
Lisa, did you want to qualify your, or clarify your question?
I
Here we
did
go.
rephrase it.
Yep. Go ahead, Lisa.
You referenced earlier, a few minutes ago, that 2 dogs were bred and one of the the 2 dogs were clear, but one of the puppies
Okay.
died.
Yes.
I don't understand that.
That's a misspoke. So at the very beginning, before we had any of this information, the breeder thought those dogs were healthy, and that affected puppy came out of 2 carriers, if that makes sense. So they weren't genetically clear. This was back 25 years ago, 30 years ago when this first happened. So she didn't know the genetic status of the dogs.
Thank you.
And then here we go. From Joanne Lee. Do we know how far back the mutation occurred?
That's a great question. We have a dog that at least in the mid-90s tested positive as a carrier that I know of, but I do not know beyond that.
Kevin, I had a question. If going forward we use frozen semen on a dog, how would we go about testing with that?
That's a good question. We may not be able to, so then I would recommend breeding to a clear dog if it's
Okay.
very old frozen semen, because then you're safe. You know, even if that frozen semen dog is a carrier and it goes back that far, if you breed it to a clear dog, you'll be safe. So you would have to test the puppies, but
Okay.
at the worst, it's just it would
Yeah.
be a possibility of carriers with some clear puppies if you bred any old frozen semen to a clear dog.
And you talked about how OFA did dip into their chick DNA bank to test some of those dogs. And this is something I know Sheila has worked hard with the SHCA. Moving forward, how important would you say is that type of banking of the DNA of current dogs for this type of research?
So there's kind of 2 answers to that. To answer your first question, if that frozen semen dog had DNA banked, you could test that dog.
Yeah.
So that, maybe individually that would be helpful. And then on the whole, as technology advances and we're able to look at different parts of genetics, and as we want to, it's really helpful for labs to be able to have a pool of DNA already collected on hand that the chick bank releases that to the research group for free. And so, if the research group finds a mutation, but they're curious how prevalent it is, they can take a sample of that DNA and test it. And we already have that there for them. And it's free to the research group, which is really important.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, you have another question. Cheryl Phelps wants to know that if this has been around this long, why has this not been a concern for other kennels?
Well, we don't know exactly how long it's been around. I'm just saying that as far as back as I know, there was one dog in the 90s that was a carrier. So hard to say for sure. And it's also hard to say what the trend of the carrier rate is. So was just this a naturally kind of, we call it spontaneous mutation that happened that has now since kind of slowly become more prevalent, so more carriers, or has this been back, around for a very long time? I can't answer that question. So, I think the safest thing with how severe the diseases are is to test. And if we breed, we don't eliminate carriers, but you can breed those to clear and you move ahead with clear puppies, there is a very good chance that we could get the carrier percentage quite low without throwing away those pedigrees or genetics. You can keep going with them. Just with the information, you can be mindful of moving ahead with dogs that are clear if you want to, if they have merits. But that's a good question. I've thought about that. I can't answer how long it's been around, but it could be not, spontaneous, or just there's no reason. Mutations in our DNA happen all the time, and it could be something that happened in the 80s and 90s, and now we have the ability to recognize it. The other thing that could be is that, as Dr. Blanker knows, she practices, this may have been misdiagnosed before, and so this disease does look similar to other neuropathies, so other nerve diseases, and could be potentially SHPN1, but it was diagnosed differently back then because we didn't know any better. And so that's also a possibility too.
All right. We have a question from Tammy Bradford. From the chick DNA, would we be contacted if a sample was identified as a carrier?
I don't believe the research groups have the ability to, I think it's blinded, if that makes sense. So I don't think they actually know. They know the sex and the date of birth and information, but I don't think they know exactly the dog's registered name and that level of information. So I don't think that would happen.
Since ICSB has my semen samples, can be sent in for testing? Joanne Lee.
That's a good question. I can look at the, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You can send in a semen sample. There are specific instructions on how to do that, but it's actually really nicely laid out for you in that step 1, where you can, do you want to submit blood? Do you want to submit a cheek swab? Do you want to submit dew claws that you took off of puppies, or semen samples? So you can.
Okay. All right. Any additional questions? These have all been good. Oh, here's one from Mara Snyder. Could it be that the varying severity is SHPN1 has been influenced detection with time? Could symptoms have become more severe?
It's a good question. I do think that the mildly affected dogs fly under the radar a little bit, until they don't as they get older. But that those mildly affected dogs, I could easily see being misdiagnosed by veterinarians that either we didn't know about this disease or not. So mildly affected dogs could have flown under the radar, for sure.
Any additional questions? Okay. I think that's all we have in the Q&A, Kevin.
Great. You guys feel free to email me any questions. If you want to talk privately, or you have more questions that you think about later, I'm happy to answer them.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank
Kevin,
you.
so much
Awesome.
for
you.
donating your time to us tonight and answering all these questions and explaining everything to us.
Absolutely. And reach out to me anytime with questions or anybody else on the committee. Hope everybody has a good weekend.
Great. Thank you.
You.
Thanks.